All right, so we wanted to jump on this call real quick and chat about this because we were talking about the differences between tall people and short people. Me being the short one, Tanner being the tall one. I'm 5'5", Tanner's. So I'm 5'5", about 150, 60 pounds, depends on where I'm at with,
Mhm.
my training and everything. And Tanner, you're 5'10". How much do you weigh?
I'm about 175, 180 right now.
Okay. So yeah, we got into the discussion talking about different calisthenics movements like front levers, and then Tanner said something like, "Yeah, oh man, but you're like short, you're so lucky," or something like that. And then I got a little triggered, and I was trying to make the case, and so it kind of pulled us into this like whole discussion around levers and physics and muscle physiology and how that plays in. And the first
Mhm.
argument I was making was as a shorter guy. Now I'm totally like theorizing here. I might be completely wrong, but that, and you worded it really well, so you might have to clean up what I'm saying, Tanner. But the idea was that, let's say I'm doing a front lever and I'm using my lat at 5'5", 150 pounds, that my muscle fiber composition is relative to my frame, as where Tanner's lats and muscle fiber composition is relative to his frame. So the idea that the contractile proteins in my lats, which are designed around my frame, doesn't differ much from Tanner's. So I don't know. Did I word that right, or how would you phrase that?
Yeah, no, you did a pretty good job. It's just like, yeah, the way I see it is my lats are proportionate to my body, same as your lats are proportionate to your body, and it's about levers, right? So we're talking about levers and angles and force vectors. So I think the force vector would be the same. It'd be the same direction, and it obviously would apply a similar amount of force. But then we go into the consideration of if you're going to the midline, if you're pulling to your waist, like relatively, we probably have like similar um, lines of pull. You know what I'm saying? Like we're like our arms are like not the same length, but relative to our bodies. But
Mm-hmm.
then the issue becomes weight, right? Where it's like automatically, if I'm 5'10", I'm gonna weigh more. I'm gonna, because
Right.
bro, also you gotta consider this relatively to your body and my body, right? We might have relatively the same size lat relative to our frames, but what are our arm lengths? Do I have exceptionally long arms and legs? You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
I do, an exceptionally long spine. I have a very people have commented on my exceptionally long spine. They've been like, "Bro, you got an extra vertebrae in there or something." I'm a very
Yeah.
like I have a very lengthy build. Um,
Hmm.
I'm built like a tall gymnast. Like 5'10". I remember looking this up because I was like back when I was getting into acrobatics. I was like, "Fuck, am I like too tall?" Obviously, like
Hmm.
I'm not. I've seen like people way taller than me doing like crazy shit. So it's all excuses, but it was just like a joke we were making, and they were like, "Oh, let's actually like do an episode on this," because I was like, "Oh, this is
Yeah.
actually a really interesting topic." Because people
Yeah.
are going to complain about it. They go through Path of the Ranger, or they're in Path of the Juggernaut, and they're complaining that they're too tall, right, for a
Hmm.
front lever or whatever, or they're too tall to we don't have any acrobatics courses up yet, but say we have an acrobatics course. I have a friend that's like 6'3", and he's like a professional tricker, and I'm like,
Hmm.
dude, he's like a beast. I'm 5'10". I'm short compared to him. He's like
Hmm.
way better than me. So anyways, like because it has its pros and cons. Like right, he would have more centripetal force because he is able to pull from a longer like length. You know what I'm saying? So he can go
Hmm.
whop and pull. But again, like you said, it's all relative. But honestly, I think the only way that we could measure this is with a scientific study. We would have to like find the relative. I'm not great at math, so don't ask me to do it. I'll participate, but I ain't doing the math. But
Hmm.
we would have to find the relative like average, between us, and then measure like to see the relative average. Are my arms, legs, and back longer than the relative average? Like, you know what I'm saying? In comparison to yours, like that would be what it have to be. And then the percentage of how much more of a challenge, theoretically, that's gonna create for me as a taller individual. But I
Well,
don't
I
know how to
think
answer it, so.
I don't think there is a right or wrong answer, right? Because just as you said, is having like a long spine. It's like bio individuality. Like it just depends on
Ex-
the individual, and
yes.
there's I don't think there'd be any way to accurately predict or measure because it's just like the said principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. It's
Yep.
like yesterday I was out feeding our donkey. It's so funny. Anyway, I'm like petting the donkey and he has like this long neck, but because his head is positioned so far from his core,
Mhm.
the muscle on the back of his neck is just insane, like insanely
Yeah.
hypertrophied. So it's like, okay, you could be a tall guy or a short guy. It doesn't matter if you don't have the adaptation to the imposed demands of training front levers every 3-4 times a week for 5 years. It doesn't
Yep.
matter. Like you don't have the adaptation to those demands. So okay, I
Exactly.
guess we just answered a question there. Like one, it
Yeah.
depends
No.
on the individual's body makeup or structure, and then two, just on the skill acquisition.
Yeah, it really, at the end of the day, like because honestly, back when I was training calisthenics hard, and obviously now we were just talking before we hopped on here that both of us are going to go, much harder on these things we used to do because we got a little bit too obsessed with the biomechanics stuff, and for good reason. We're dealing with issues, but now that we understand the body better, we understand physiology and biomechanics better, and how the
Mhm.
nervous system actually like deals with this stuff, we can actually not only avoid pain, but even be even better than we were when we were younger. Because back a couple of years ago when I was working on this stuff, I mean, I mastered my back lever. My back levers have always been super simple and super easy for me. I don't know why, and it freaks people out. It's honestly,
Mhm.
it is the freakiest looking move. Like people think you're gonna rip your shoulders out, but to me, I used to be able to hold that for like a full back lever. I used to be able to hold that for like at least 10, 15, probably even close to 20 seconds. Like I used to just
Yeah.
hold it. I used to hold it comfortably.
Yeah.
And then front lever, I got to almost doing a straddle front lever, but it was just, I don't know, it was just harder. But again, I needed more work on it. It's just something that my body was not familiar with. But yeah,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it really it does just come down to, um, like you said, the said principle and how much force you're applying for that change. Because anybody can do a planche, anybody.
Right. And just how much like frequency and exposure you're getting to that particular skill. And
Time.
it's just like you look at gymnasts, dude. Like when I was a kid, I remember just obsessing over the Chinese gymnastics teams videos on YouTube, and it's like borderline like straight up slavery, right? Like they just take these
Yeah,
kids right out
yeah,
of birth, and they'll actually measure children, like the Chinese Communist Party. They'll do
yeah.
like these what do you call them, anthropometrics? Yeah,
And
where they'll look at the body proportion. They'll be like, you are going to be gymnast, and then they just throw
yeah,
them in a gymnastics camp. And I remember watching those videos and being like, God, I wish I was born into Chinese communist regime and just like but the reality is those kids probably hate their fucking lives. So I shouldn't
yeah.
say that, but like
I mean, they didn't know anything
I
else.
but they would look at those body measurements and they would look at what is ideal for what particular sport, and then that was
Exactly.
their life. Now you are going to perform in the Olympics on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party as a power lifter, or no, a Olympic weightlifter, right?
Yeah,
um so yeah, but just to keep like the conversation pertinent to size differences
yeah,
in individuals, the other thing we touched on was that there are certainly variations in strength standards and strength capabilities when it comes to differences in size. So like I was telling you, we had this guy who would come into the gym when I used to coach CrossFit back in the day, who was like 6'7". He was just this huge dude, and it was literally impossible for him to pull a conventional deadlift. So for anybody listening, a conventional deadlift is going to be feet hip width apart, hinging forward at the hips with a relatively slight knee bend, and pulling mainly from that hinge position using the posterior line of the body, the glutes, hamstrings, and spinal erectors. But this guy had to get his feet like out into like a sumo position to where his toes were like touching the plates on either side of the bar. And so his force output and capability was entirely contingent upon the muscles he was able to recruit in that variation of that exercise. So yeah, dude, like some people based on your height, it's just going to depend on the movement and again the adaptations to those demands.
do you think if the plates were wider or not wider, the circumference was like longer. You know what I'm trying to say? Like he
Mhm.
had more distance between the bar and the floor. Do you think he could have done traditional conventional deadlifts?
Well, the issue was his femur length, and that's what the issue is with a lot of guys who are really tall is they tend to have like really long femurs.
Mm-hmm.
So when they go to set up for the deadlift, because their femurs are so long, their torso comes way down and forward, or their knees go way over the bar. So it ends up becoming more of a squat, which is really how you end up injuring yourself when you're pulling a deadlift. Is when that weight, if that weight gets too far out in front of the hip position, it puts that additional load on the spinal column. It's kind of similar to like doing a good morning deadlift. So if anybody's listening, it's like you put a like you're going to do a barbell back squat, but instead of squatting, you literally just send your hips straight back with a very slight knee bend, and you're just really loading up your entire posterior line. But because the bar is positioned so high on the fulcrum point of your spine, the erectors in your spine are really having to work. So now if you take that same analogy with a really tall deadlifter with long femurs trying to pull a conventional deadlift, they're pulling that load way out in front of their body, and they're just really overstressing their spinal column when they do that.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because I see what you're saying. It's not just the distance between the bar and the floor. Because I was like, well, because if he could have the bar higher up and closer to like a more a relative distance that would be the same to like an average sized guy like myself,
Mhm.
like would that be different? And I'm thinking, I'm like, damn, like maybe it would, but at the same time, like you said, for someone like that, it's not just relative. It's straight up just physics. Like the
Mhm.
physics just don't account because for him, he is always going to have so much length in his spine. And he's not going to be able to properly get into his hips, and so he's going to essentially go into an awkward position where, like you said, he's going into more of like a squat than a hinge because he just doesn't have the room to hinge. Then
Mhm.
he's just it's gonna put force on his back, which isn't wrong. It just means that he would be using his back, so he would have to like if he wanted to do conventional stuff, like he would just have to like start super light. Because again, said principle, his body would adapt. I mean, would he hurt his back? I mean, he wouldn't if he's just doing maybe 50 pounds. Like you know what I'm saying? If he's
Mhm.
just doing the bar, you
Yeah,
know.
pretty much.
And
Yeah,
that's what's interesting.
and yeah, it's fascinating. I think the other thing we were talking about too was aesthetics, the difference in aesthetics
Yeah,
with shorter people and taller people. And that
yeah,
one's pretty simple. I think most people listening can understand, like, okay, when you're shorter, you tend to have shorter muscle insertion placements. So if I have a humerus or my, upper arm bone is relatively short, my elbow and the distance between my elbow and the top of my humeral bone are going to be a lot shorter than somebody like Tanner who's 5'10". So therefore when I go to flex my bicep, the fiber composition the fibers are a lot closer together, therefore it creates more of this kind of peak in the bicep versus a taller guy when they go to contract that muscle. There's more distance, like the fibers can't contract in a short space like my bicep can.
yeah.
So I would say that that's why you look at like some of the freakiest bodybuilders, like Lee Priest is like, in my opinion, I think it's a general consensus, is like the freakiest looking dude like to have ever existed. But the guy's like 5'3" or 5'4". He's shorter than I am, and he weighed like over 250 pounds in his prime, dude. Like
Jesus.
imagine me with like 250 pounds of just straight muscle.
Dude, I can actually. That's the funny thing.
I know,
I'm
I
like,
like
wait,
to imagine
Ryan
it too.
could achieve that.
Yeah, one day, man. One day.
Well,
Once they make the myostatin inhibitory drug like mainstream. So, do you know about that at all?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, so myostatin is the protein that inhibits protein synthesis. So they found, I don't know if you've ever seen those viral photos of like cows that just look like the Ronnie Coleman of cows. They're just like these
Oh yeah,
insane. Yeah, they just like it almost looks Photoshop, but it's actually real. And what they did was they inhibited the myostatin protein or gene in those cows. The same thing. It's I would argue that's probably similar to what happens with like pit bull breeds, because you look at pit bulls and they're just like
Yeah,
these fucking balls of muscle, and they did it
yeah,
with mice as well, and it literally doubles the muscle fiber composition in the animal. And
dude.
there's yeah, so now there's actually gene therapy clinics. It's like 25 grand. There's this guy named Dr. Akan, Akhan, and he runs this anti-aging gene therapy clinic. And for 25 grand, dude, you can get an injection of myostatin inhibition, and I forget what it's called. It's something follistatin, I think, is what it's called. And
Mm.
Juji Mufu, the influencer, the super
Oh yeah,
jacked
dude.
acrobat dude, he went
Yeah.
and got one, and
Oh no.
yeah, I'm really excited to see. I love watching other people be the lab rats on stuff, but
Yeah.
I
I'd never do it.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't in this early in the phase, but I'm not gonna lie, dude. Some there's a part of me, because you and I talk often about the
Mhm.
importance of being able to optimize your physiology through natural means, right? Through sun exposure, through good nutrition, through good rest. But there's also this like mad scientist in me that's like, dude, like how cool would it
Dude,
be to just see what your body can do, like like the ultimate biohack, like
dude.
there's a part of me that wants to walk that line a little bit.
Well, we were having that conversation. Like you were talking to Rob, remember? And
Uh-huh.
you were talking about this because you were like talking about. I think you were talking to Rob about it. And you guys, yeah, I remember you telling me that you guys were talking about how the things that we have in our life, like, how'd you guys explain it? It's like yes, we that's how it was. We are of the natural world, but we're the only creature that can perceive beyond it, right? So
Mm.
if we have this gift of perceiving beyond this natural world and having the ability to not break it but bend the rules,
Mhm.
why wouldn't we? You know what I'm saying? Why not?
Yeah,
You
I mean,
know?
totally, dude. I mean, it's like you think about the world, let's say a pre-human world, and you have all of these tools that are just laying around, like potential tools to be created in the future. So, right, like, okay,
Yeah.
you have rocks and you have soil and you have water, and you just have animals running around in this natural environment. And then along comes intelligent human beings, and
Yep.
they're like, oh, I'm gonna break this stone into a chunk of stone where I can then like tie a branch to it and make a hammer. And or it makes me wonder if all of the natural resources that we have available to us were here to be discovered and mended into something more, or is it just like happenstance that we figured that out? So a good example would be like oil, right? Like
Yeah.
extracting oil out of the earth to run these automobiles. Was oil always there so that we could discover it and then ultimately develop these machines that ran on oil? Or is it just like happenstance that we're like, oh, it turns out that we can actually put oil in this thing and it runs, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do know, bro. And I mean, people are always going to make that argument of like with religion, but
Hmm.
not that I'm not going to bring up religion because I don't want to bring these kind of topics into the podcast or into the guild. But
Hmm.
just to touch on it briefly, people would make that argument, and then my argument is that I'm like, this is about science. This is about, there's a place for faith. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
this is about science. It's like I'm like, hey, look. I understand what the Bible says. Like, I understand that people like believe in that heavily and are like, these are the rules. I get it. But who wrote that? Like, you know what I'm saying? So,
Hmm.
is he bending the
Yeah.
rules? You know what I'm saying? So
Well,
I'm just like, man. At the end of the day, we got to make our own rules. And yes, there are laws to reality. We obviously know that through science, through Newton and Einstein and other geniuses like that who have uncovered these things.
mhm.
Um, but dude, when you understand how to play the game, you understand how you can bend it a little bit, if that makes any sense. So,
Well,
anyways, I'm not saying
yeah.
go out and just bend all the rules and shit, but the rules are there for a reason. They're not there to follow. They're there to know what you can do, so that
Mhm.
you know what you shouldn't do. But then you know the fine line between them. Like, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's almost this weird double-edged sword, like scientific innovation, because it's like, okay, on one hand, if human beings just died as this is going to be really controversial, and I'm not saying I believe in this, it's just like an idea, but if human beings died as a natural consequence of the natural environment and we never did anything about it, right? Like we never developed the polio vaccine or all these different things, and natural selection would dictate stronger genes progenerating and bringing about more resilient human beings. But then so then what do, right? We have to get innovative. We have to use our human intellect to create these vaccines and these
To speed up
antigens
the process.
to speed up the process. But then here's the double-edged sword part. So now, okay, people aren't dying from all of these natural stressors in the natural world, but you're also progenerating genes into the gene pool into future generations that now people are sicker and they're weaker.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, right? Like I fall into this category too. Like I have characteristics about my own physiology and stuff that probably wouldn't do well in a highly stressed environment. In fact, a
Yeah.
majority of first world modern humans, people who live in these first world nations, dude, if we had to like go back to the Stone Age, 95% of us would be dead, dude. The guys who'd be alive are the guys who are out hunting at their hunting camp every weekend, and like out chopping wood and bringing firewood back and shooting deer. Those are the dudes who would probably make it. So
Yeah.
do you get what I'm saying about the double-edged sword of scientific innovation and
I
like
actually I love that you brought that up because I've actually like never really thought about it like that because yeah, like we have all these different. I mean, I've thought about it, but not in the way that you put it because the way I see these different innovations is I see them as interesting, but not the answer. You know what I'm saying? Where I'm like, okay, this is cool. I'm glad we have these medical, innovations because they save people. But then we run that argument of like, okay, well, what if it's their time, right? Well, then how do you
Mhm.
decide that? Well, I'm not going to call it God. I'm just going to call it nature, right? Just to not steer that path of religion. If nature is like, hey, it's your time, and then humans are like, no, it ain't. I fucking choose, right? And then they're like, boom,
Mhm.
fucking, I'm putting this in my body. I'm putting this in my body, right? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
You're breaking the rules, but then it's like, how far can you push it? Because then, how's that going to affect your offspring, right? So it's interesting to think about that because yeah, like we because instead of just dying from a flu, and then like your kids being stronger from it, and yada yada, their kids, and that taking 1,000 years to be stronger from a flu, right? And so taking 1,000 years to evolve from that, and then being immune to it. Now you're strong as fuck, right? Now you
Mhm.
have 1,000 years of evolution behind you, right? But hey, man, we ain't got time for that. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
we're like too intelligent for our own goods, right? We
Mhm.
but then the question is, well, can we just not accept death? Right? Because if
Mhm.
I'm like, oh Ryan, I'm sick, bro, I got the Black Plague or some shit, and we're back in ancient is it medieval fantasy, right? We're back in a medieval fantasy, and
Yeah.
I'm like laying on, I'm like I got Black Plague, I'm like I'm like Ryan, and then you're like sitting there, you're like, damn, bro, like this sucks, and it's
Mhm.
like. It's like where am I getting to this?
I have no idea.
because I can choose. I can. If there's an option to choose that I can survive, and I can take 1,000 years, and I can make that amount of progress in 1 year. Of course, I'm gonna
Mhm.
take it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Does that kind of make
Mhm.
sense? If there's a magic elixir that's just like, hey, this will cure your Black Plague,
Mhm.
but it's gonna weaken your offspring. I'm like, give me that, it's, like,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
it's not my problem. You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
that's it has to be that way. But that's the mind. That's the power of the mind and the dilemma of the mind, right? Because then we mess it up for the future generations, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So it's
And
almost like
that
you're reversing it. You're reversing your biology in a way. From weakness to strength, from strength to weakness. It's like we're de-evolving.
Yeah, there's that's what's so exciting about the new research coming out around epigenetics,
Yeah.
and epigenetics, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, and I don't know that I can really do an amazing job defining it either, but the way I
Chat.
understand it is that your behaviors and your environmental exposures dictate the expression or the suppression of certain genes. So, for a long time, it was kind of this consensus agreement that, hey, if cancer runs in your family, then that's just how it is. Sorry, like there's a good chance you're going to get cancer. But now we're realizing that actually, if you don't expose yourself to those particular stressors and environmental toxins, that there's a good chance that you can actually suppress that genetic expression. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, who has over 500 million data points on this type of research, I mean, he
Yeah.
has people who come to his shows or to his seminars, and they are like crippled. Like, the stories you hear, they sound too crazy to be real, but again, they have over half a billion data points on everything, and they're showing that through consciousness, through simply changing your mindset, the way you view yourself, the way you behave, everything about yourself, that you're literally signaling for the expression of new genes, and you're doing away with an old biology and bringing about a new biology. And that is so exciting, dude. But that would never have been discovered had we not moved forward with the scientific process. So
Yeah.
it's kind of comes full circle now, and it's really exciting. Anybody who's listening, Dr. Joe Dispenza, definitely check out that work. And Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's a stem cell biologist, has shown unequivocally that you can actually dictate how your genes are expressed, and it can all start within the mind. And then just one thing I'll say about that, because I don't want to lose this thought, and then I'll let you take it away, is the thought thing is so powerful to me, because everything starts with a thought, and then as a result of a thought comes physiological responses to that thought, which then comes genetic expression. So really, it makes sense that if you can change the unconscious wiring in the mind, the unconscious thought processes, that ultimately you're going to signal for different physiology, which is going to signal for different gene expression, and it just makes total logical sense.
Yeah. No, dude, and this is where it gets crazy, because then we're kind of getting into my field a little bit here with the sensory mechanics, because
Uh
it's like,
huh.
well, every idea in the mind is conceived from the physical senses. Like the brain would be a useless mesh of tissue if it wasn't sitting inside a body that could send it information. So then it's like, yeah, like the brain is going to be sending information down to the body, but if the body isn't sending adequate sensory inputs and it's not processing properly through the body and into the brain can't create adequate outputs. And so this is where I draw the line with a lot of the brain type stuff, because obviously it works, but
Hmm.
I'm always like, can it be better, right? And
Hmm.
honestly, in my opinion, like, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it can be better if we involve sensory development. I think the world of the nervous system and the world of how the mind and the body correlate and work synergistically is so fascinating, and it's so cool to see how people can transform when you
Hmm.
just apply the right kinds of stressors to their body and have them process that. You know what I'm saying? You change
Hmm.
the way that they process stressors and obviously I'm talking about stress in general, and stress and how stress is the killer, right? That's what's causing these problems. That's what's activating these these uh these poor genes. Like that's what's creating free radicals, like the useless cell mass. And
Hmm.
so if we can change the way that people are responding to stress in a physical sense, and we can reduce that overall physical uh, relationship, that tonal
Hmm.
relationship with that stress that creates that sympathetic tone,
Hmm.
then that sends different signaling to the brain. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, and I would say how that correlates to like the Dr. Joe Dispenza's work is through consistent meditation, day in, day out, visualizing the individual that you want to become, everything about that individual, just like how we have in the Iron Guild, we have the Vision of the Night quest that we
Yeah.
encourage people to take, which is just kind of like imagining what that end outcome is, and imagine that you're meditating on that day in, day out, so much so that you literally embody a new vessel. Like you're literally like a new individual, because what makes up a person, aside from their physical makeup and their the genes that they were born with, is their perspective on life, their circumstances, their familial circumstances, what they were told, their peer groups, their belief systems. So when you can change all of that, you're literally signaling like a new biology. And anyway, just getting to the point, I think where it starts is first becoming conscious and aware of these unconscious patterns. So making the unconscious conscious, and
Yes.
then meditating on the new conscious awareness that you wish to have, So that
Yes.
way the new baseline is no longer being chronically stressed, because
Yeah.
that's the beauty of like mindfulness meditation, is
Yeah.
when you find yourself unconsciously reacting to stimuli, you're able to capture that unconscious moment, become aware of it, and demyelinate that pathway, and re-strengthen a new pathway, and then pretty soon that becomes your new default, and that becomes your new biology and your new expression of self.
100%, dude. And we can even put it in like, metaphysical terms, but what's great about like metaphysics and the whole spiritual kind of idea of things is that with metaphysics we can sort of take these spiritual concepts and turn them into legitimate, like, logical scientific concepts, which is like one of my favorite things to do, like, as you know, with the like human design knowledge, and taking that and learning how to weave that into um, sort of a scientific concepts, because I
Mhm.
think about the nervous system. I think about how the nervous system is responding to stimuli, and that's why I believe that, like, both of these things paired together. Like, I just like had this thought where I was like, oh, I was like, whoa. I was like, wait a minute. Both of these
Right.
together, both of these together. If you guys are in the Iron Guild, or you're not in it, I would join, because Ryan and I are literally putting out courses on both of these concepts. We're putting out meditations that are based upon rewiring your neural pathways. We're putting out courses that are meant to rewire the way your nervous system functions. We're tapping on the mental and the physical. You can't lose. You can't lose with the two combinations. Like, now that we're talking about this, I'm like, wait a minute, dude, this is insane, because obviously, it makes sense. You're like, oh yeah, like, why not like train both? But people don't understand how it works. They don't
Mhm.
understand the correlation between mind and body. So, anyways, I was just thinking about that. I was like, whoa, this is dope.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I think we've covered a lot, and maybe we'll
So,
just
anyway,
keep this
front
one.
levers. Yes.
Yeah, so about front levers, this is gonna be like such a this title to this episode is gonna be like 5 or 6 different subjects, which is cool. I mean, I like going down these rabbit holes, but anyway, so if anybody's listening, definitely go check out the Iron Guild, our community on School. We've been plugging away at this thing, and this is like, we Tanner and I have like poured our passion into this. So if you guys are, if you're men, you want to belong to a men's group that is medieval, dark fantasy, gamified, like you're a nerd like that, and you want to step into like basically Skyrim, and you want to
Yeah.
center like that was our whole goal with this community, is we want people
Yep.
to be in a virtual like world when they're in there, and be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna
Yeah,
take these concepts and I'm gonna integrate them into my day to day.
dude, and taking Dr. Joe Dispenza again into context, we have different classes, we have different paths that people take, and different, so so essentially, what's so great about a gamified and fantasy themed, or whatever themed community like this, is that when you step into it, you're stepping into a new identity, right? And whether you wish to take that identity on, daily, and at all times, or you choose to take that identity on when you're training, when you're crafting potions from the apothecary, or you're making food from the feast section of the guild, like, whatever you're doing, you're in that world, so it's a very real thing, man. I mean,
Hmm.
with the Dr. Joe Dispenza stuff, and dude, I mean, we were just talking earlier about how just building this guild for these guys has inspired me to pursue more of the calisthenics skills, like get back into it, and try to get better at them again, and embody these characters, embody this world. I built this whole lore, and I'm continuously building it. And when I'm like working, when I'm in the guild, I'm on the school app, and I'm working on this. Like, I'm not Tanner Carmack anymore. I'm a ranger. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like
Yeah.
in the world of Arendor. So, anyways, it's a very real thing. It's a very real thing. Making kind of a fantasy. I mean, we were actually kind of talking about that earlier with with different belief systems and things like that. It's just it's yeah, belief systems are huge, man. And when you set the stone properly with a proper belief system, whether it be a fantasy medieval theme, or it
Mhm.
be whatever else you want it to be, it's what gives you the drive and the motivation to keep going, because it is a new identity that you're embodying and that you're stepping into. So
Yeah,
ah,
and I'll just say one more thing about that because I'm glad you brought
go
that
for
up, and I love talking about this concept of the idea of creating a theme in your life because I'm sure some people have heard of the the be the story of be the hero of your own story, and that's
it. Yep.
basically and again, not to bring up religion, but just for the sake of example, like okay, think about how many Christians there are in the world. I mean, it's like a ridiculous amount of people are Christians in the world, which is awesome. I'm a huge fan of the Christian ethos, but
Yeah.
like if you just break that down from like a mythological standpoint, like you've got the Jesus archetype who's like the pinnacle of what is good and what is pure. But then you've got in the Bible you've got like the giants walking around. You got Satan down in hell chained up with like these demons roaming around her. And you like to me it's like it's a fantasy. It's like I mean not to like I'm sure there's people that believe it and stuff, and to a degree I believe in a lot of it too, but it's like you're creating this theme, this story that you're playing the character in
Yeah.
this fantasy realm. So it's like you get to decide the story and you get to decide how the hero in that story behaves, acts, and pursues his
Yep.
future. So
Like
that's
Dungeons
that's
and
what
Dragons.
we like Dungeons and Dragons, like the Iron Guild, like that's what we're aiming for with our program over at the Iron Guild. So we'll drop a link to that in the video below here in the description, and we really encourage you guys to come on over and be a part of the community. We're building a huge community over there. We're super excited, and we would just love to have you.
And it's just infinite growth. Like I just had a new idea where I was like, dude, we should totally do like online like D&D sessions. I know you. I don't think you even played D&D before, but we should like find one
Mm-mm.
once we get more people in there. It'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be super dope. Like I like having features to involve more of the gamification, but
Mm-hmm.
for the time being, there's a ton of freaking content in there. There's so much
Oh
stuff.
yeah, if Tanner and I had $10 million right now, we'd probably be working with a game development team like Unreal Engine or something,
Yeah.
and we'd be like, "Hey, we need an augmented reality men's self mastery program, and we want
Yeah.
people to be able to." We want people to go and run a 5K, and then as soon as they're done, it unlocks like some badass 3D asset. Like
Yeah.
that's like the ultimate goal. So
Yeah. Dude. It's very much
yeah.
possible with the way technology is going, man, and the way that the development of this guild is going. I really think that people are going to enjoy this, and I think that um, I think it's going to help a lot of men, dude. And the only thing I don't like about what we're doing is that we're the ones building it. I
Yeah.
wish that I wasn't sometimes because it's so badass, and I'm like, dude, I wish that
Hmm.
I just came across this on school and was
Hmm.
like, dude, I gotta join that. Like, I would
Yeah.
love if I was 18, 19, 20 again. I would eat this up, dude. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, and
Absolutely. I'm with
it's
you.
like is that I'm the one is that we're the ones building it. I'm not I'm the one crafting the
Yeah.
story, and I'm
Well.
like, Jesus.
Yeah. Tanner's the CNO. That's Chief Nerd Officer, and he is like the lore, like the characters, the Rangers, the Juggernauts. That's like all Tanner and I. Before we built the guild, I was never even really into medieval stuff. Honestly, like I hated
Yeah.
freaking Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. Couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
I thought it was so like boring. But now that we're in it, and Tanner's come up with like the lore behind Arendor, which is this like fantasy, dark fantasy village, and now I'm all into it. In fact, I'll sit down, I'll start watching some medieval era thing, and I'm like, oh dude, we got to add that element to the guild.
Dude, same.
Yeah.
Same.
So
Is
anyway, I guess we better wrap it up, but
we should. We
eh,
should.
great chat, dude, and let's definitely pump another one out here for everybody listening in the near future.